royal mind almost 2,000 years ago, the map of the world was completely different. Empires rose and fell by the edge of the sword, and blood was the ultimate price for power. In this brutal, male-dominated era, a woman was born whose very name would send a shiver through the greatest generals of Rome, a name that, even after 2 millennia, brings a storm of beauty, politics, and suspense to mind: Cleopatra. Legends paint her as a mesmerizing siren who seduced powerful men to save her kingdom. But the truth hidden in the dusty scrolls of history is far more fascinating. She was not just a beautiful face. She was a ruthless politician, a brilliant strategist, and perhaps the most intelligent ruler of her time. A queen who lived in a magnificent palace on the coast of Alexandria, where the most powerful men in the world longed for just a glimpse of her. But was Cleopatra's life really as glamorous as the legends suggest? Not at all. Her life's journey was filled with thorns, terrifying betrayals, cold-blooded conspiracies, and deadly dangers from the very day she opened her eyes. Our story begins in the year 69 BC, in Egypt's most beautiful and historic jewel, the city of Alexandria. This was the cultural capital of the ancient world. A city where scientists mapped the stars, philosophers debated the meaning of existence, and intellectuals from all corners of the globe gathered. Its crown jewel was the Great Library of Alexandria, a treasure trove containing the collective knowledge of human civilization. Cleopatra's father, King Ptolemy C, was not actually of native Egyptian descent. He was Greek, a descendant of Ptolemy I, one of Alexander the Great's most trusted generals, who had seized Egypt 3 centuries prior. The Ptolemaic dynasty ruled Egypt as pharaohs, but they lived as Greeks. They spoke Greek, dressed in Greek fashion, and looked down upon the native Egyptian populace. However, a dark and disturbing tradition was alive inside this royal palace. To keep the royal bloodline pure and ensure that power never left the family, brothers and sisters were forced to marry each other. And where there is an unnatural greed for supreme power, hatred and paranoia are born naturally. Inside the royal palace of Alexandria, walls had ears, and food had poison. Everyone was each other's sworn enemy. Sisters plotted against brothers, and children wished for the death of their fathers. In these suffocating, dangerous circumstances, young Cleopatra chose a completely different path of survival. She realized early on that in a world ruled by brutal physical strength, her greatest weapon would be her mind. While her siblings indulged in palace luxuries and pointless court politics, Cleopatra turned her back on the vanity of the court and marched into the Great Library of Alexandria. She buried herself in manuscripts of philosophy, economics, geography, and military strategy. Her dedication was unmatched. She became the first and only Greek ruler in her family's 300-year history to take the trouble to learn the native Egyptian language fluently. She did this because she understood a fundamental law of power. To rule a people, you must first speak to their hearts in their own tongue. But she didn't stop there. Cleopatra could speak, read, and write 9 different languages fluently, including Latin, Ethiopian, Hebrew, and Arabic. When foreign ambassadors arrived at the court, they were stunned to find that the young princess didn't need translators. She negotiated with them directly in their own native languages. She wasn't preparing to be a mere trophy queen to be bartered away. She was actively sculpting her mind to rule an empire. Fatal alliance. By the time Cleopatra reached her teenage years, Egypt was passing through a catastrophic economic and political crisis. The shadow of the Roman Empire was growing longer and darker with each passing day. Rome was an unstoppable military juggernaut, expanding its borders rapidly. and the entire Mediterranean world trembled at the march of its legions. Egypt, though incredibly wealthy in grain and gold, lacked the military might to stand against Rome. Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy Sheath, managed to maintain his fragile grip on the throne only by borrowing massive amounts of money from Roman bankers and bribing Roman generals with staggering amounts of Egyptian gold. The native Egyptian people despised him for this, viewing him as a weak, pathetic puppet king who was bankrupting their country to please foreigners. In 51 BC, when Cleopatra was only 18 years old, her father passed away, leaving behind a kingdom on the brink of civil war and a mountain of debt. According to her father's will and rigid Egyptian law, Cleopatra could not rule alone. She was forced to marry her 10-year-old younger brother, Ptolemy Setheth, and jointly share the throne with him. But Cleopatra, with her fierce intellect and towering ambition, was absolutely not ready to be a puppet or a placeholder. She immediately seized the reins of the state. She signed official royal decrees using only her name, minted coins featuring her face alone, met with foreign dignitaries without her brother, and took absolute control over the imperial treasury. This aggressive consolidation of power did not go down well with the young king's cunning and ambitious advisors, led by a ruthless eunuch named Pothinus. These court plotters wanted a weak, easily manipulated 10-year-old child to sit on the throne so that they could rule Egypt in his name while indulging in limitless corruption. Seeing Cleopatra as a massive threat to their ambitions, Pothinus and his co-conspirators launched a vicious, false propaganda campaign against her. They spread rumors in the streets of Alexandria, telling the public and the military that the young queen was a dangerous, selfish witch who wanted to betray Egypt to the Romans. Slowly but surely, they turned the royal army and the volatile mob of Alexandria against Cleopatra. Realizing that a dagger in the dark was waiting for her, Cleopatra was forced to flee the capital in the dead of night to save her life. At only 21 years old, Cleopatra found herself stripped of her crown, exiled from her home, and left as a refugee in the scorching, harsh deserts of Syria. But she was not a woman to sit in the dirt and weep over her misfortune. The desert sun did not wither her, it hardened her resolve. While her brother celebrated his apparent victory in Alexandria, Cleopatra was busy formulating a masterstroke. She traveled from tribe to tribe, using her legendary eloquence and linguistic skills to win over the fierce desert chieftains. Through sheer force of personality, she raised a massive mercenary army in exile, marching them right to the eastern borders of Egypt, ready to clash with her brother's forces in a bloody civil war. While the two opposing Egyptian armies stood frozen on the border, waiting for the order to attack, an unexpected event occurred on Egyptian soil that would alter the destiny of the ancient world forever. Rome's most feared, brilliant, and powerful general, Julius Caesar, arrived in Alexandria. Caesar was chasing his political arch-rival, Pompey the Great, who had fled to Egypt after losing a massive Roman civil war. When Pompey landed on the shores of Alexandria, Ptolemy Setheth's cunning advisors saw an opportunity to win Rome's favor. In an act of shocking treachery, they lured Pompey ashore, brutally murdered him in front of his family, and severed his head. When Julius Caesar arrived a few days later, Ptolemy's advisors proudly presented him with Pompey's pickled, severed head as a gift, expecting the great general to be pleased. But their calculations backfired disastrously. Pompey may have been Caesar's enemy, but he was still a Roman general, a consul, and a hero of Rome. Seeing the dishonored head of his fellow countryman cut down by foreign court plotters filled Caesar with absolute disgust and fury. Instead of backing the young king, Caesar marched his legions directly into the royal palace of Alexandria, took control of the premises, and demanded that both Cleopatra and Ptolemy VI disband their armies and appear before him to settle their dispute under Roman arbitration. When this news reached Cleopatra's camp in the desert, a sharp, calculating spark appeared in her eyes. She instantly recognized that this was the single greatest opportunity of her life and the most dangerous. Julius Caesar was the master of Rome. If she could win him over to her side, her brother's faction would be crushed instantly, and the throne of Egypt would be hers. But how could she reach him? Her brother's battle-hardened army guarded every road, port, and corridor leading into Alexandria. If she attempted to walk through the front gates, she would be captured and executed on the spot. It was here that Cleopatra executed a historic, high-stakes gamble that is still remembered with absolute astonishment today. Under the cover of pitch-black darkness, she boarded a small, unassuming fishing boat with only one loyal servant, a Sicilian named Apollodorus. They slipped past the massive Roman and Egyptian warships anchored in the harbor and docked quietly at the back entrance of the royal palace. To bypass the palace guards who were searching every individual, Cleopatra laid down on a large, heavy, and expensive hemp sack or carpet. Apollodorus carefully wrapped her inside, tied the top securely with a leather strap, slung the heavy bundle over his muscular shoulder, and boldly walked through the palace gates. When challenged by the guards, Apollodorus claimed he was carrying a priceless, highly confidential gift from the desert, meant strictly for the eyes of the Roman general, Julius Caesar. The guards bought the story and escorted the servant directly into Caesar's private, candlelit chambers. Apollodorus walked to the center of the room, untied the knot, and gently unrolled the bundle across the marble floor. Caesar watched in absolute breathlessness as, instead of gold, silk, or jewels, a 21-year-old, sun-kissed Queen of Egypt dramatically stepped out from the folds of the fabric. Caesar, a 52-year-old veteran of 100 bloody battles, was instantly captivated. It wasn't just her appearance that struck him, it was her sheer, unbelievable audacity, her complete lack of fear, and her razor-sharp wit. Instead of begging for help, Cleopatra stood tall and addressed the Roman dictator in flawless, elegant Latin. She did not speak like a desperate refugee, she spoke as an equal sovereign. With her mesmerizing voice and logical arguments, she convinced Caesar that Ptolemy's advisors were untrustworthy traitors who would turn on Rome the moment it suited them. By the time the sun rose, Caesar was completely enchanted, pledging the full military might of his Roman legions to support Cleopatra's claim to the throne. When young King Ptolemy VI entered Caesar's chambers the next morning and saw his exiled sister sitting calmly next to the Roman dictator, he realized he had been completely outmaneuvered. In a fit of childish rage, the boy king tore off his royal diadem, threw it into the dirt, and rushed out into the streets, screaming to the mob that his sister had betrayed Egypt to Rome. The city erupted into chaos. Ptolemy's massive army, numbering over 20,000 men, surrounded the royal palace, trapping Julius Caesar, Cleopatra, and a small garrison of just 4,000 Roman soldiers inside. For months, a brutal, claustrophobic siege raged. The palace was cut off from food and water during one of the most desperate nights of fighting. As the battle spilled into the harbor, a fire broke out. The flames spread rapidly from the burning ships, leaping onto the docks and tearing into the grand halls of the great library of Alexandria. Cleopatra could only watch in horror from the palace windows as thousands of rare, irreplaceable scrolls, the very books that had formed her brilliant mind, turned into ash and smoke. A tragic loss of knowledge that humanity would mourn forever. Despite the desperate odds, Caesar held the line with tactical brilliance until Roman reinforcements finally arrived from Syria and Asia Minor. In a massive, decisive battle outside the city, the Egyptian forces were utterly crushed. Young King Ptolemy VI attempted to flee across the Nile in a panicked retreat, but his heavy golden armor dragged him down into the murky depths of the river, where he drowned. Cleopatra had won. She returned to the capital in a spectacular triumphal procession, crowned as the absolute, undisputed sovereign Queen of Egypt. To appease the traditional Egyptian public, she nominally married her remaining younger brother, Ptolemy Civ, but everyone knew where the real power lay. Soon after, Cleopatra gave birth to a son, whom she proudly named Caesarion, or Little Caesar, cementing a biological and political bridge between the wealth of Egypt and the military might of Rome. Broken empire, with her position secured, Cleopatra decided to project her immense wealth and power directly onto the global stage. She packed her bags and traveled to Rome, accompanied by a massive royal entourage, her infant son Caesarion, and her puppet brother husband. She moved into one of Julius Caesar's private, breathtaking villas located right across the Tiber River. Her arrival in Rome was an absolute cultural earthquake. The conservative Roman citizens and elite senators watched with a mixture of awe and deep resentment as this foreign, independent Eastern queen conducted court in the heart of their republic. Roman women began copying her iconic hairstyle, her distinct eyeliner, and her pearl jewelry, while Roman philosophers flocked to her villa to converse with her. Caesar even went so far as to erect a golden statue of Cleopatra inside the sacred temple of Venus Genetrix, an unprecedented act that deeply offended traditional Roman sensibilities. But beneath the glamour, a dark, dangerous undercurrent of hatred was brewing in the marble halls of the Roman Senate. The senators were fiercely proud of their republic. They despised the very concept of kings and queens. Watching their supreme commander, Julius Caesar, act like an oriental monarch under the influence of an Egyptian woman filled them with terror. They feared that Caesar was planning to dissolve the Senate, declare himself king of Rome, and move the capital to Alexandria to rule alongside Cleopatra. The boiling point was reached on the fateful morning of March 15th, 44 BC, a day known to history as the Ides of March. Julius Caesar walked into the Senate hall, completely unaware of the trap that had been set for him. A group of over 60 senators, including his close friend Brutus, pulled out concealed daggers from beneath their robes. In a frantic, blood-soaked frenzy, they stabbed Caesar 23 times, leaving the master of Rome dead on the floor at the base of Pompey's statue. When the news of Caesar's brutal assassination reached Cleopatra's villa, her world shattered. Her protector, her ally, and the father of her son was gone in an instant. Rome descended into immediate chaos and lawlessness, with armed factions roaming the streets. Knowing that she and her son Caesarion were next on the assassins' hit list, Cleopatra acted with lightning speed. She gathered her guards, fled Rome under the cover of darkness, and boarded a ship back to Egypt. Back in Alexandria, she faced a grim reality. Egypt was hit by a severe famine due to failing Nile floods, and the Roman Empire was fractured into a massive, multi-sided civil war between Caesar's assassins and his loyal avengers. Cleopatra knew that whoever won that civil war would eventually turn their eyes toward Egypt. She needed a new protector, a new alliance, and she needed it fast. Eventually, the dust settled in Rome, and two men emerged as the supreme leaders of the Roman world. Octavian, Caesar's young adopted son and legal heir, who took control of the western provinces, and Mark Antony, Caesar's fiercest, most charismatic general who took command of the wealthy East. Mark Antony was a larger-than-life figure, a brave soldier who loved wine, women, and the theatre, and who envisioned himself as a living embodiment of the Greek god Dionysus. Antony needed massive amounts of money and grain to fund his upcoming military campaigns against the Parthian Empire, and there was only one country on earth with a treasury deep enough to afford it: Egypt. In 41 BC, Antony sent a formal command to Cleopatra, summoning her to meet him in the city of Tarsus, in modern-day Turkey, to explain her actions during the civil war. Cleopatra understood the psychology of Mark Antony perfectly before she even set foot on his ship. She knew he wasn't a cold, calculating intellectual like Julius Caesar. Antony was a man of grand theatre, passion, and spectacle. She intentionally ignored his first few summons, making him wait, building the suspense. When she finally arrived in Tarsus, she did not just show up. She staged an entrance that paralyzed the entire city. She sailed up the Cydnus River on a magnificent royal barge that looked like a floating palace. The ship's prow was plated in shimmering gold, its sails were made of royal purple silk, and its oars were made of pure silver, beating time to the ethereal music of flutes, harps, and pipes. Cleopatra herself lay beneath a canopy gilded with gold, dressed not as a politician, but in the likeness of Aphrodite, the goddess of love. Beautiful young boys fanned her like cupids, while her handmaidens were dressed as sea nymphs handling the steering and ropes. The air for miles around the river was thick with the intoxicating scent of expensive perfumes burning on the deck. The entire population of Tarsus rushed to the riverbanks to witness this divine spectacle, leaving Mark Antony sitting completely alone on his official judgment seat in the empty marketplace. When Antony was invited onto her ship for a lavish banquet that night, he stepped into a wonderland of lights, golden platters encrusted with jewels, and a level of luxury he had never seen in his life. Mark Antony, the toughest general in Rome, lost his heart and his mind at the very first sight. Cleopatra's political trap had snapped shut perfectly. This meeting transformed into a deep, passionate, and unbreakable political and romantic alliance that would last for the next decade. Antony moved to Alexandria, abandoning his duties in Rome to spend his winters indulging in a life of unimaginable luxury with Cleopatra. They formed a legendary exclusive drinking society called the Inimitable Livers, spending their nights playing high-stakes games, pulling pranks on the citizens of Alexandria in disguise, and feasting like gods. Together, they had 3 children. But back in Rome, Antony's cold, calculating rival, Octavian, watched this all with a predatory smile. Octavian launched a masterful propaganda war against Antony. He stole Antony's official will from the Temple of the Vesta and read it aloud to the Roman Senate. In the will, Antony declared that Cleopatra's son Caesarion was the true heir of Caesar, gave vast tracts of Roman conquered territories to his children with Cleopatra, and requested that upon his death, his body be buried not in Rome, but alongside Cleopatra in Alexandria. The Roman public was outraged. Octavian skillfully convinced the citizens of Rome that Mark Antony had been completely emasculated and brainwashed by the black magic of an Egyptian sorceress. He argued that Antony had forgotten his homeland, his Roman virtues, and was preparing to lead an Oriental,